Even though nothing had been resolved, my head quickly cleared while sitting there. After a few minutes, Kira softly said, and she dissolved again, I didn't know you had a tattoo. I like it. What's wrong, Kira? It's a giant squid, isn't it? This is not the time and place, Kira. We're in a dangerous position. We need to get the fuck out of here. He's caught me off guard. Most people think it's a regular squid. She looked taken aback. It's obvious from the shape of the caudal fin. And of course it's its eyes. Kira, what's wrong? I repeated. She said nothing for a minute. It is acceptable to be selfish. People are inherently selfish, so therefore it's fair to be annoyed by selfish behavior. I took a minute myself. It's part of the human psyche, fuck you. It happens. Although people aren't usually open about it, it's unavoidable. But it's not as black and white as that. For example, the only reason you're here now looking out for me is in the hope that I'd do the same for you. No, I just really didn't want to be mentioned in the suicide note. If I said right now that I care nothing for you and I'll never speak to you again, would you still be here? Her tone was emotionless. It took something out of my pocket before I answered. If for me then no, I wouldn't. I've gone through enough to know that at the very least all relationships should be equal. I got up to leave. Kira grabbed my hand to stop me and felt the bracelet I was clasping. I let go of it in her hand and without turning back said, I got this as a thank you for showing me around and making me feel welcome. I don't mean it at all. Thank you, Arsicko. I'll treasure it always. I turned back to return her warm smile before making my way back to class, sensing that she needed some time alone. We went into town that evening. It was quite late, yet the illuminated stained glass bathed the town in a faint rainbow. We were too absorbed in our debate to pay attention to where we were going. As a result, we ended up in an unfamiliar area, but we didn't take notice until... Kira stopped. Do you hear that? No. I hadn't heard anything. I was too deeply engrossed in our conversation. No, what was it? I looked around. Where are we, Kira? Kira shrugged, about to speak. More alert. I heard it this time. Kira looked at me, intent in her eyes. I nodded, and we followed his call through the hidden side street. Who? Who are we following? We were greeted by a spectacular courtyard, and the whole area was roofed with vines and had an air of being forgotten. Kind of reminds me of that part from like the beginning of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood where you have to kill the executioner guy by jumping out of the rafters. The ancient well took center stage, with a star being an ornate bird cage. It hung from the roof, shimmering brilliantly in the moonlight. Kira walked over and became translucent for some reason. As she somberly investigated, its door was wide open. Strange. Hey, look at all those kinds of seeds in there, Kira said, sieving a few through her fingers, and sat well next to her. Owls don't eat owls don't eat seeds, do they? And the plot thickens. Why would you assume it's an owl? Kira sat next to me and stayed silent for a minute, giving ourselves time to acclimatize to the mysterious courtyard and the air of a grand cathedral. Kira's dulcet tone was a welcome addition as she continued her previously interrupted conversation. Large portions of moonlight were blocked by the vines above, imprinting a dense pattern of the leaves on Kira's face that refused to fully mesh with her as she enthusiastically annotated her history lessons with hand movements. She talked about the fabled egalitarian society that founded and lived harmoniously in the ancient town before the rest of the world brought in its influences. I think everyone lived in peaceful communism until one day the capitalism attacked. It sounded truly idyllic, although Kira must have invested a lot of time in studying the day-to-day life and talked about it enthusiastically. She didn't sound fully convinced. So if this island ever had contact with the outside world, do you think things could have been continued in that way? I asked, jumping on her train of thought. Well, in theory that'd be great, but most people aren't good through and through, as I'm sure you know, traveling as much as you have. Realistically, it was inevitable. The islanders just blame others so that they don't have to take responsibility for their own mistakes. It's human nature. Damn right! I guess there can never be real harmony in human societies. There will always be destruction until there's nothing left to destroy. Agreed! It used to shock me, returning years later to places I'd once lived. Sometimes it took me a while to realize, but every single place without fail had changed, and never for the better. In fact, it's the places you see the most economic growth that tend to lose the most. Kira looked up at the moon, her hands grasped together and eyes glinting as a gentle breeze ruffled the leaves above. Barely audible, almost like it was part of an exhaled breath, I'm sure I heard Kira say, "It was always inevitable." After finishing training with the martial arts club, I decided to look for Kira. I was concerned as she'd always stop and watch a few minutes of her way as her way of supporting me. Training was outside the entrance of the school, so I could have seen Kira leave, meaning she must have still been inside. I checked all the obvious places, but there's no sign of her anywhere. I leant against the wall of her classroom as I watched the setting sun through the full-length windows, wondering where to go from here. A seagull, silhouetted against the sun, flew past to join his friends on the roof. Then it hit me. I hadn't tried the roof, and I hadn't tried seagull yet. That KFS down the street's been begging for it. The school had a flat roof, so it made sense that you'd be able to go up there, and sure enough, a few corridors later I found a staircase. There was a key already in the lock, and the door was ajar. I cautiously nudged it open and saw her there. Kira was standing 10 meters or so in front of me, leaning against the wall of the rail, watching the picturesque sunset as it had done moments before just below. Her hair was being tousled forcibly by the wind, as if trying to keep dying embers alight. I was cut short. Fucking seagull just cock-blocked me. The seagull had perched loudly on the rail by her side. Taken by surprise, Kira jolted to look, tears flying off her face as she did so. Her eyes were distant and desperate. God knew it wanted to be, but my heart told me it wasn't my place to intervene. That I was never meant to be a part of this elegy, so although it pained me, I quietly left. I received a call later that day. You will be moved within a week. Make sure you are ready to leave at any time. I'm confused by this person's life. Like, it would make sense if they're moving around and shit because they're like a military brat or something. If they're not, why? Why would you just like bounce around at college age when you could just pick one and stay there? I spotted her instantly, leaning against the lamppost shielded by the shade of a nearby tree. Wearing a pale, virtually see-through dress, I was glad she hadn't noticed me as I needed a minute to adjust. Kira was oblivious to the world, focused completely on the gently lapping waves. She sheepishly looked up at my direction as I approached her. "Oh, hey!" she said excitedly as she leapt towards and forgot... I cannot read today. It could have been my imagination, but I could swear that as her head passed mine at the edge of my vision, I saw her expression go blank. "I'm so happy you're here. I've been looking forward to this for a while." We found a secluded spot under a tree and laid out the blanket along with the food we brought from town the day before. We sat talking about life, about everything and nothing. I decided not to tell her I wasn't going to be around much longer. I knew it was selfish, but I was genuinely happy. A rare emotion that I had to cling on to just a little longer. Fortunately for me, she was definitely a rambler. I loved listening to her. She's so annoying. It's so hot. Every word oozed character and significance, but at the same time was unprovocative and somehow soothing, so she's saying nothing and everything at the same time. It's just noise. I wasn't really thinking about much, I was just basking in the moment, but I suppose if I had been, I would have been working out a way to make those days last forever. "Let's go swimming!" Kira said, removing her dress. I casually rooted through the picnic basket, not wanting her to see my flushed face. "Don't worry about that, let's go!" she exclaimed as she gestured towards the ocean. Meekly do as you're told, throw down the bread roll and throw the bread roll. Waste food. Race, you bitch! I shouted as I passed her, eyes focused on the ocean, my now foot-long hard dick bouncing in the breeze. The blazing sun sparkled off the sand, creating a runway to the cool, refreshing water. I looked over my shoulder as I reached the sea, not taking into account the sand's new, saturated consistency. Crash! My foot slid as a result. I found myself part submerged in the shallow water. A bunch of shells had impaled themselves into my back. I heard splashes approaching excitedly from the side. I looked up sheepishly towards the source to find Kira guffawing wildly. Okay, there's some fucking... Just say laughs! This doesn't need to be complicated. You didn't need to bust out your thesaurus for your fucking internal monologue in your, 5-minute fucking visual novel. Game on! With my face unchanged, using the sea to hide my erection, I dislodged her ankle. We traded expressions. I chuckled as she frantically wobbled, trying desperately not to fall. She failed. And she fell right on top of me for pushing the shards of shells further into my spinal cord. There was a thin layer of water between us, but I could feel her body pressed against mine. My throat had tightened, resulting in an audible gulp. Kira blushed and looked away. I'd never seen Kira embarrassed before. I'd never even considered it a possibility. Right, I'd had enough. This wasn't her. I playfully pushed her off me. She looked over at me, feigning anger, seeing all the shells now in my back that she wanted. I got up and offered her my hand. She used it to pull me back into the water. This time I looked at her disgruntledly. Kira closed her eyes and stuck out her tongue. This led to a full-blown play fight, which I maintained to the day I let her win. Granted, she manipulated the shells to move me like Ratatouille. But that's neither here nor there. Now that our bodies had forcefully adjusted to their new surroundings, we decided to swim along the coast. We followed the cliffs, stopping in little covers, to see if there was any brightly coloured fish we hadn't previously encountered. I'd swum in many different areas of the Mediterranean, but none were anywhere near as broad a range of aquatic life as here. It was truly stunning. In one of the larger coves, I noticed a hole at the bottom of the cliff face, only partially exposed above the water. "Hey, check this out!" Kira looked over at me puzzled as I stuffed 3 fish into my face. "Looks like this could lead somewhere," I elaborated as she swam over. Kira dunked her head under the water. "It's dark, but I see light at the end. There should be enough room to come up for air if we need to." I'm going for it. Fancy joining me?" "Fuck it. We're in this deep already." Kira held out her hand, which I accepted, and on 3, for a second I thought that was an ooh-woo. We dived in just below the surface. The tunnel wasn't long, but it led to one of those beautiful sights I'd seen in my life. The isolated pool had a denser, warmer water that cast dancing reflections over all the walls. It felt like a bath at the perfect temperature. My guess is that the area was saturated with salt, as we could lie fully supported in comforting, rocking arms of azure. "This could actually be paradise." "We should just stay here forever," she uttered faintly. "Seriously, stop busting out the thesaurus." Is that how you spelled maneuvered? I don't think that's how you spelled maneuvered. Kira gently maneuvered herself closer to me so that we were lying side by side, watching the clouds together. "Self-contained masses of water floating high above us in the sky. Seems pretty amazing when you think about it," Kira pondered. "When I was growing up, I was told that clouds are formed by fish that have escaped the sea. I remember thinking, this doesn't make sense to me. Why would a fish want to escape the sea? Apparently if they swim as fast as they can towards the seabed, they careen sharply upwards. They trap thin layers of water and air around them. So that they leap out of the sea and spread their fins as wide as they can. They simply carry on travelling at the angle they left the water, till eventually reaching the sky. Apparently whales inhabit the largest clouds, but I couldn't believe that one bit. That sounds like a reasonable thing. That's a robust theory," I said, mustering up all the energy I could as I felt Kira look over at me expectantly. In all honesty, I had blanked out halfway through the story. Her voice was just so soothing. I felt like I was curled up by a warm fire. Kira didn't say anything for a while. I looked over to make sure she hadn't sunk. She didn't look impressed. "You didn't hear any of that, did you?" "Of course I did. About how fish live in the clouds and dolphins are delicious." My sentence trailed off as I realized how ridiculous that sounded. Kira knew exactly what was going on. I looked over to confirm, and, as I expected, her expression hadn't changed. This pushed me over the edge. I tried to stifle it initially, but couldn't stop myself from laughing, especially when Kira's stony gaze broke. We lay there, comfortably roasting in the bright sun, soaking in the warm atmosphere, with tranquility extending time until inevitably the sun began to set. "It's getting late," Kira muttered disappointedly. "We should get back." The sea glowed a beautiful rich colour as the sun bestowed a last burst of energy upon it, longing that it wouldn't be enough to survive its cold, unforgiving Luna mistress. Kira reached the shore before me, crouching down, pushed her fists into the wet sand, and using them to hoist herself up, she walked towards our blanket, the fading sun twinkling off her wet body. She looked over her shoulder at me as I clumsily clambered out of the salty expanse, not focusing on my coordination. Kira sat on the blanket with her legs to one side when I finally caught up. Water dripped from her face as she smiled warmly at me. "Here!" "Here!" I offered, holding out a towel. She leant closer, put her hand on the towel as if to take it, but didn't. Our faces were now only inches apart. I knew she needed a breath mint.
You know what? I've been thinking. When we're young, we're taught not to trust our own judgment, and to second-guess everything we do. I've come to realize that there's no reason to live in fear of your convictions. If you can't trust yourself, then how can you expect to trust anything? I have firm beliefs, and I know what I'm doing is right. I may feel difficult superficially, but I have a job to do for the greater good. That being said, I regret that I chose you.
Kira leant closer and kissed me. The moment I had pined for is the very second I laid my unmarred eyes on her. I instantly lost myself in a wave of endorphins. I'd never felt more alive, more detached from this world. Yet there was a tinge of emptiness, an emptiness that was rapidly growing. I opened my eyes to see the characteristic green of her irises seep out of their confines. I knew she was draining my essence. I could feel my soul leaving, yet I couldn't move. Hell, I didn't want to move. I passed out. Are we dead?
I shuddered as our sicko soul slowly filled my body. It was a feeling like no other, stronger than heroin. My body had come to crave it. As I was nearing completion and the adrenaline began to wear off, her soul felt more like a rapidly spreading infection, but even then I couldn't stop. I felt tears trickle down my face as I firmly grabbed our sicko's head, preventing her from flopping backwards and our lips parting. My hands began to shake as the last trickle of essence left her body, and my body numbed. Our sicko fell to the ground, lifeless. My mind blank, I sat watching our sicko as the moon peeked over the horizon, slowly amplifying the paling corpse, like a detective illuminating a crime scene. When the numbness has disappeared enough for my legs to function, I hobbled towards the sea, eager to release our sicko's soul in exchange for the life I'd built, for my mission. The gentle waves intensified as I approached, ravenously trying to claw in its meal. I felt an indentation under my feet, looked down to see the footsteps we'd made on our return to the blanket. We were meant to have a picnic. I felt tears stream down my face again. What was wrong with me? This had never happened before. It was usually so easy. Memories of our time together bombarded me, pounding against my skull, making me lose my breath. I told her I could stay with her forever. It was all just an act to make her trust me. Wasn't it? I instinctively grasped my wrist to comfort myself. It was missing. I felt a stabbing pain in my heart. It must have fallen off during the ritual. It must be with our sicko. No. The corpse. The panting intensified. I felt involuntary need to look back, but was blasted with a gust of wind. The waves had intensified into a raging storm. It couldn't wait any longer. I knew what I had to do. I released the truth she'd shown me. I could not give her soul to the sea. The reasoning behind my mission is just. Humans will destroy my realm. Eventually their lands too, but in trying to prevent that, I have become as bad as them. I accept the consequences of my actions. As humanity returned to my eyes and the chance to relinquish our sicko's soul passed, all but the wind grew calm. I felt the second gust lift me off to the ground and hold me like a puppet above the sea. Finally I could see our sicko on the blanket, glowing slightly in the moonlight. She looked otherworldly. I regretted everything, all but this final choice. Although I knew this was where I was meant to be, I closed my eyes and selfishly drifted back a few hours, trying desperately to push away the excruciating pain, to be in a place where I couldn't feel my blood vessels violently bursting one by one. I was back in that magical cave. It felt like a womb, protective, homely, not part of the real world. We should just stay here forever. I maneuvered myself to our sicko's side. I meant it. With that, I reached over and placed my hand in hers. She interlocked my fingers with mine and smiled warmly. But that was all long ago, in some brief lost spring, in a place that is no more. In that hour, the vag frogs begin, and the scent of Shroty's infected anus comes the strongest. Well, that was an hour of my life wasted, I guess. There's probably a better ending if you're not such a dick, but I really don't care enough to play this through again. I might make Shady play this. We can do this as like a short thing. He'd probably not be a dick, because that's, just kind of his nature. Is that it? Does it go to the fucking men? What? Who the fuck is Grant? Okay, I guess it was just like, hey, do it again.
bitch. Get the better ending. Fuck you. Alright, hopefully this is the last emergency session and normal uploads will resume. After this is going to definitely fill up the 2 episode slots. I hate this. I hate being sick and having to do all this shit and not have my fucking computer. Alright, see all you lovely people next time. If you meet someone you think is a siren or Cthulhu monster, don't go to the beach with them. Eat dolphin.